And welcome to the Shir tonight on Motzoi Shabbos Parsha Zocher. I'll dedicate this Shir to Hatomim Shneir Zalman HaKoyen Ben Elisheva, should have a refuah shleima. Someone asked me this past week or 2 weeks ago, not necessarily for this year, what would happen when you have a Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and Shkolim. Same question could be Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, which is Parsha Chodesh. Similar question should be when you have Chanukah, Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, when you take out 3 Sforim. And there's a say there that normally the Sefer for Rosh Chodesh is the second, and the Sefer for Shkolim, Chanukah, HaChodesh, that is third. That is correct, but that is in accordance with the rule of Todir Kodim, the one which is more frequent takes priority. And therefore, the Parsha Shavua is the more frequent, therefore that's the first Sefer Torah. The second Sefer Torah is for Rosh Chodesh, which is 12 times a year, or 11 times a year, because you have to take off Rosh Hashanah, perhaps, doesn't matter. And then we have the third Sefer Torah will be used for the specific. What happened is that they took out after the 6 aliyahs in the first Sefer Torah, they took the second Sefer Torah, it was open to Shkolim, and they started reading Shkolim. And then, well, they did realize in the middle, well, that's one thing. Let's say they did, or they did, whatever. And then there's 2 issues. Do they finish reading Shkolim, or do they have to switch in middle? Secondly is, what happens to the Haftarah? Is the Haftarah of Shkolim, or is the Haftarah of Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Hashamayim Kisi? And here, I was very surprised, but this is how this story happened with the Noida B'Yehuda. So in the Noida B'Yehuda in Chelik Beis or Chaim Siman Yud Aleph, he tells this story. He had a yeshiva, and the Bocharim made this mistake, and they came in middle of Parsha Shkolim. One of the Bocharim realized it was a mistake, and they asked him what to do, and he told them 2 things. Number 1, they should finish what they're doing, finish Parsha Shkolim and the bracha afterwards, then switch to, I guess, to say Kaddish, and then to switch to the Sefer for Rosh Chodesh. And he told them then they should read the Haftarah of Shabbos Rosh Chodesh and miss out the Haftarah of Shabbos Shkolim. Actually, I went through the tshuva of the Noida B'Yehuda, and I was really blown away by his the Geoinus which he comes, which are the Bekiyas, etc. For example, from where do you know that you should finish off Shkolim and not switch to Rosh Chodesh? And he brings a raya from Korban Pesach, which was done before Korban Tomid, and whether you should do the Zrikas Adam and etc. Haktorah. He brings from rather remote sources to prove that point. And then in the second point, he also goes through very strong, convincing arguments that that really in the Haftarah of, really one should be saying the Haftarah of the last reading. So let's just read this, how it's brought in Mishneh Brura in Tov Reish Pei Hey, and let's read it inside. V'im acha shegomar parshas haShabbos. Finished the 6 aliyahs in the Shabbos Sefer Torah, then by mistake took the Sefer Torah which was rolled for Shkolim and made a bracha and began reading, and then they realized in the middle. So you should finish off Parshas Shkolim with the attendant bracha, and then the third Sefer Torah, which should have been the second one, will be read for Rosh Chodesh, and for Haftarah to read Hashamayim Kisi, because the Haftarah always reflects the topic of the most recent, the last reading. He says that would be Mishkolim, that would be also in Parshas Chodesh. If it's whenever you have 3 Sefer Torah, this mistake could happen, and that's the guidance. And he quotes here the Sha'ar Ephraim. Sha'ar Ephraim is a specialist sefer on Kriyas HaTorah. He himself, he was a contemporary of the Tzemach Tzedek. He himself has some reservations, but he says Kvar Hoira Zokein. I mean, actually, though, going through, although at first I was skeptical, but when I went through the Noda B'Yehuda's Shuvas, I was really very, very impressed with, very convinced by his arguments. Let's move on to the next question. Okay, Talmidim asked me this question: is there an issue of sitting? Is there a problem of sitting on a table? I think last week we discussed about the dimensions of the shulchan in the Beis Hamikdash, with the equivalent to the shear of 40 sa'ah. I'm not going to go through that again, but that brought to possibly this question of shulchan doimeh lemizbeach. What you have over here is a sefer called Minhag Yisrael Torah by someone called Levi, very much a contemporary, and he says it's a common saying you're not allowed to sit on a table because a table resembles the mizbeach. Yes, that which the shulchan is doimeh lemizbeach is written in poskim, Mamor, etc. He shows various sources that yes, we have the idea of the equivalence of a shulchan to the mizbeach, but this idea of not sitting on a table, so shulchan doimeh lemizbeach is, yes, that's true, but therefore you should not sit on a table. That is written in Sefer Chassidim in the context if there's sforim on the table, but it doesn't talk about a table where you're eating. Then it is the Ke Maimer Ha'olam, like the common saying, that is in the Sefer Yosef Oimetz. Now, Sefer Yosef Oimetz, so for a few hundred years ago, it's Munich, Frankfurt. So it's written by I think Rabbi Yus Peshamish or something, who was he records him in Hoge Frankfurt or something like that, and he writes there in the name of Sefer Chassidim, but actually in the Sefer Chassidim is, as he just noted, it just says not to sit on a table with sforim, not sitting on a table bichlal is not recorded there. The lower quote, the lower quote here is from Sefer Hayira. Well, this is also for the Sefer Yosef Oimetz, and he quotes from Sefer Chassidim, and then he quotes from Rabbeinu Yonah, don't kill a bug, a louse at the table, because the table is doimeh lemizbeach. All right, so there is something about it. I mean, if he's told me he hasn't found it, I probably won't find it a proper source for it either. There is that sensitive. It's a minhag ha'olam, but to say it's got a mokin poskim, that I cannot say. Someone's asking if it's a meyuchitz for sfarim, a table is meyuchitz for sfarim. Okay, I mean, I don't have a halacha about that. I know that on the bimah in shul, we've gone through this before, that it's not appropriate to put a hat on the bimah, to put things like which are made the pushkas and svarim people put on the bimah. We've gone through this before, but to put other mundane things, they don't belong on the bimah. Okay, let's move on. But that's because it's meyuchad for Kriyas HaTorah, which is obviously a greater kedusha than regular svarim. Right. So the Sefer Chassidim is saying when there are sforim. Sorry. You're pointing out that sakon leishev al shulchan shemiyuchad l'sforim. Okay, I didn't notice that. All right, well, we'll look up again at another time. You're saying that the Sefer is saying not necessarily because that's sforim present, which that's a din of Shulchan Aruch, but the Sefer Chassidim is saying if it's miyuchad l'sforim, is designated for sforim, then it's got a greater kedusha. Okay, I accept that. Fine. Let's move on. So someone asked me a question about opening such a card playpen. Whether you're allowed to open such a thing on Shabbos. First he asked me, I didn't know what it was exactly. I wasn't sure whether what he's describing is what I had in my mind. I asked him to send me a picture, also with the intent I'd be able to have a little bit of show and tell for the shir tonight. And so there we are. So I said that you are allowed to open such a thing on Shabbos, and then we're going to read this halacha in Shulchan Aruch, and that is in the dinim of boina, etc. on Shabbos. Talks here about if it's a temporary gag, a temporary roof, if you have no intent to make an oihel. It says like this: if it's already from before Shabbos, and there was already this roof, but it was folded, then you are allowed to open it. It's like, therefore, he says a chair, a folding chair. So you open it up, and it has like a leather seat. You think about a fisherman's chair. So he says that you're allowed to open them on Shabbos, even if it has mechitzas beneath, because it doesn't resemble an oihel, making an oihel, because you're not doing anything, because it's all been made already. The elements here have all been already, it's just they've been folded, but so you're unfolding, that's okay. Then he talks about setting up a chuppah. I'm not sure exactly what he means by this. Perhaps you have a chuppah already on poles and just opening it. I think we've gone through this before, that in Hayom Yom it says something about the Rebbe Rashab with the when he was appointed to the Chevra Kadisha, and they read him with a canopy or something. That there used to be a meaning of, oh no, sorry, I'm mixing up. It says that we don't spread over a canopy over the children for Kol HaNaorim, and there were places where they would make a canopy for the Chosan Torah and Chosan Bereishis, and they took the view that it's okay to spread open a chuppah, and our minhag is not to do so because of the chashash of creating oihel. So that's possibly what's being referred to over here. Then he talks about a stender, which you have fixed to the wall, about lifting it up, and says creating a shelter underneath, even if there were mechitzas. So again, he says that's okay. So basically, this is a well-known thing. That's a folding table. You are allowed to open up a folding table on Shabbos. You don't have to worry about creating an oihel. And the same thing is with this playpen, or whatever you call it, a cot, crib, whatever. Let's move on. Okay. So I had a whole journey over the past week or so. And that is, I had a question. When I did actually discuss it, I think last year, when people buy Mishlech Monos online. So a credit card, they pay by credit card. Now, there is halacha that mois ain't on koinos, that you're not koiner stuff with money. You're koiner when you lift it up, but you can't be koiner when you just pay for it. Therefore, when you order from a shop, with a telephone, doesn't matter, online or different, you ask them to deliver shlachmonos on your behalf to this and this address. So how did those shlachmonos become yours? It hasn't become yours, so you haven't given it. That was my problem. So I've discussed this in the past about the question of receiving order of Amazon deliveries on Shabbos, that it doesn't become yours until it crosses over your threshold. So therefore you're being koiner on Shabbos. So how you're allowed to accept a delivery on Shabbos is a problem of being koiner on Shabbos. And I went through this before. I'm sure some of you remember that one answer is that there is something called a kinyan, which is binding for the level of mishapara. The person enters an agreement and retracts from that agreement. So then there is a kind of klola of sorts that whoever punished the Dayan Mabel, then Hafroga should punish the one who doesn't keep his word. Once you put down the money, so then you're committed that if you retract, there's the mishapara. So the Rivosh says that for an din drabonon, that is called enough of a kinyan. That's in the context of ribis. By putting down money, it's already yours, at least for this din drabonon. The Alter Rebbe brings this also in Hilchos Shabbos. And therefore, that's my answer. Why is it okay to order stuff and it's going to be delivered on Shabbos? Not that you plan to, but if it delivered on Shabbos, why is it not a problem of kinyan? Because it was paid for already. So for a din drabonon of purchasing on Shabbos, so you can rely on that the kinyan was done when the money was paid. So I was, this Tuesday morning, I said this over. I was invited to speak at Torah Way in Golders Green. And I said this whole chokhmah that since shlachmonos is a din drabonon, therefore, having paid the money with the credit card, that's already considered yours for din drabonon. So an hour later, I get a message from one of the Balabatim who are present, and he says, I've got a kasha. He's just learning Mishnayos Eruvin. And there there is a Mishnah. So what's the story? The Mishnah is that for an Eruv, to make an Eruv in a Chotzer, so you've got 10 people, 10 members of the Eruv, 10 members of the Chotzer. So we take a loaf of bread or a box of matzah and make a kinyan on behalf of all the people. But let's say here's the case that they were going to buy a loaf of bread from this baker, this shop. So a fellow goes into the shop and he says, they're going to pick up a loaf of bread for the Eruv in my chotzer. I'm giving you 20 pence, whatever. I'm giving you a more. Now that should be my part in the Eruv. So Reb Lezer said that's okay. Chacham says no. Lo zochu lo ma'osov. Because ein mois koinus. You put down money, it doesn't mean the bread is yours. So here we have that that the Eruv is invalid, even though he paid money, and he'll retract. There's a whole Mishapara story if you want, and still is not koin of the Eruv. Now Eruv is a din drabanan. So therefore, my chokhmah of saying that kinyan from Mishapara will alleviate the question of it's called a kinyan. But here we see that for Eruv it doesn't work. Kinyan from Mishapar doesn't work for Eruv. So the same thing shouldn't work for Mishloach Monas. So if so, how is back to the question? If I pay for Mishloach Monas online, Moas Einan Koines, so how do those Monas become mine? That's way back to the question. But then actually one of the people at the Shir and Torah Waves asked a question. From where do you know that there's a chiyuv to own the Shlach Monas? Who says you have to own it? The main thing is that the recipient should receive. Who says there's a din? There's a lochem with esrig, etc. We have mitzvahs, but you have to own. Where does it say you have to own the shlach monos? So, before I got to that, there is a very interesting halacha in Bryce in Kiddushin. Let's read this carefully. A man goes over to a woman. Reuven goes over to a woman, and he says, "Here is £100, and with this £100, you should be mekudeshes to Shimon." So Reuven gave the woman money, and she has now created a bond of kiddushin to Shimon. How did that work? So he says there's a din of Eved Kanaini. Eved Kanaini, you've got this slave, and he doesn't have the ability he doesn't own anything. So how is it possible for him to be redeemed? So the Eved Kanaini is owned by Shimon. Comes along Reuven to Shimon, and he gives him £100 or £1,000, and he says, "I'm giving this to redeem the Eved." So it's as if the Eved Kanaini had received the money and paid it. So let's read this carefully. Just like Eved Kanaini, when he is redeemed, he didn't pay anything, and yet he is acquitted. He is set free. So here too, when we have Reuven gave the money to the woman, and Shimon didn't cost Shimon anything, but it was given to the woman on behalf of Shimon. Therefore, he has acquired her as his wife when it was given on his behalf. So when it was given on his behalf, even though Shimon did not touch that that money, but it was Reuven gave it on his behalf to the lady, so she becomes his wife. So similarly, I was thinking on the same lines, when the greengrocer or whatever, or the shopkeeper delivers a shlach monos on my behalf, so then it becomes as if I gave it, even though I know I wasn't koined. It still becomes as if I gave it. Fine. So then someone then pointed out that actually this idea that the shlach monos, this is going to get a bit simpler. Let's read. This is from a sefer called Yesoidei Smachos, I think. No, something you called Yeshurun. Sorry. So, okay, why I'm getting confused, I think it may be Yesod Smochus. This is from someone called Reb Gedalia Felder, who's got a lot of svarim which are called Yeshurun, Yesoida, Yeshurun, etc. And this is a book of his where he has psokim in English, and at the back he's got the notes, the sources in Hebrew. So let's read the English carefully. When sending shlachmonos for another individual, it is sufficient. So what does that mean? I live in London. I call up someone in Manchester, and I say, could you deliver shlachmonos to your neighbor on my behalf? Yeah. So you're sending shlachmonos for another individual. It is sufficient that the person be notified that the shlachmonos has been sent for him. The receiving party must be aware of the identity of the sender. But it doesn't. So in other words, there's no need for a kinyan here. Let's read carefully in the notes. This stands for, I guess, Kein Shomati Mimoron Shlita is referred to Moshe Feinstein. So Hayoz v'Hachiyuv, because the chiyuv of shlachmonos is to create friendship between these people. So you're giving gifts of food, and there's two opinions in poskim, whether the purpose of shlachmonos is to create friendship or is to enhance the Sudas Purim, or it could be both. So therefore, it's not imperative that the shlachmonos have to be owned by the one who's giving it. There's no need for kinyan. So when I ask you to deliver on my behalf shlachmonos to your neighbor, and you take it off your shelf, you don't have to do a kinyan on my behalf. It doesn't need to be mine. The ikar is that the recipient receives it through my bidding, through my cause, and knows that and appreciates that. So that's what the shlachmonos is about. There's no need that there has to be mamash ownership. Therefore, that throws away the whole question from the chatchila. There's no chiyuv to actually own the shlachmonos before you give it. Here it is. Moyadei Yeshurim. So then, in the newer edition of the Piskei Teshuvos, he quotes this, that there's no need to have a kinyan of shlachmonos, although he himself has his own problems with it. But I think I'm quite convinced that it's a valid point that there's no chiyuv of ownership of shlachmonos. Obviously, you're not yotze with stolen shlachmonos. We're talking here that it's done, or that's a mitzvah bo ba'avera. We're talking about it's legitimate stuff, but there's no need for a technical kinyan. And for that matter, you don't have to tell when you bring shlachmonos, you don't say, oh, make a kinyan a hagbor. You ever seen him bring shlachmonos? Make sure you make a hagbor tefach. It's unheard of. Even if it's not in his house, you meet him in shul, oh, pick up a tefach. It's not done. It's not necessary. Right. Right. So now I was then, this kind of brought out in my mind, I was concerned, what happens with, it comes Sukkos, the first day of Sukkos, we're all anxious. How do we do Arba Minim with the child? We want to give a child a lulav, and if he takes the lulav, he can't give it back. So we know that a child can be koine and can't be machne. So if so, how can a child do shlachmonos? Now, it's not so clear that there's a chiyuv in Pascha. It's also clear that there's a chiyuv of chinuch of shlachmonos. Arguably, it's only once they are independent, as far as food arrangements, etc. But certainly, the Rebbe encouraged, many times you can see in the Sichos, the Rebbe encouraged that children should be encouraged to give shlachmonos. Just recently, there was a whole thing in the Haskashos last week, how the Rebbe reached out to the schools in Eretz Yisrael, obviously through a middleman, but that the schools in Eretz Yisrael, they should encourage that the children should give shlachmonos, and obviously there was also a cheshbon that through the children to reach to the parents. But there is certainly a well-known thing that children are encouraged, and so I was concerned: how does the child give shlachmonos when he can't give things away? So here we have in Shulchan Aruch Siman Reish Lamed Hey Cheshem Mishpat, which says the following: a child up till the 6 years of age cannot give away to someone else. from 6 years onwards until he becomes an adult, if he understands a little bit about buying and selling, you've seen, you checked him up, and they are how do you say, they're with it, they understand what's going on. And then he says, if it's more than 10 years old, by default we're going to assume, unless it's got some mental problem, but after the age of 10, for sure a child understands that selling means, or giving it away means it's not going to be yours anymore. So once the child is over the age of 6 or more and understands that giving away is final, so then if they sell or they buy, etc., or they give a gift, it is valid, whether it's a large amount or a small amount, etc. But this idea that a child is able to give is a takanas chachamim. We're talking about portable articles. We're not talking about land. All right. So that's as much as is relevant to our discussion. And therefore, the answer is very simple. When it comes to that, really, min haTorah, a child does not have the ability to give away, to be makneh, to give a gift. And therefore, when it comes to sukkahs, with the arba minim, which is a din min haTorah of lokachtem lochem, then the child is not able to give it back, and therefore we have that problem. What do we do about lulav with children after, etc., and the whole to do? By contrast, when it comes to shlachmonas, because shlachmonas is a din d'Rabbanan, therefore we can rely on the fact that takanas chachamim is that a child over 6 is able to give. And therefore, the matonas shlachmonas is valid. It's not a problem. You can then now ask, what about a younger child? Well, a younger child under the age of 6 is arguably not subject to the dinim of chinuch. We still do mitzvahs with them, but the fact that it's not technically yotzer is not such a problem. Let's say when it's a child under the age of 6, it's more the parents are giving the other child the shlachmonas through their child. And it's all right. It's all part of the simcha of Purim, but it's not actually technically yotzer the mitzvah shlachmonas. Okay, not such a problem. Right. So I think we've answered the question of those questions. Someone's asking that Sukkot is only the first day. Some say the second day also. But I was just really dealing with the question of shlachmonas in reflection to what we're so particular about when it comes to sukkahs, to the arba minim. Okay, so here we have, someone was asking about whether it would be okay to pause during the Megillah to translate, etc., to explain what's going on. So what you have here is actually from a sefer called Nasivim B'Stei HaShlichus from yours truly. That's Chelik Beis, which was addressed there. So here the question is, I'm going to read it. In order to keep the people's attention to the reading of the Megillah, am I allowed to pause between one chapter and the next to explain in the local language what's going on here? So the answer, there are poskim who objected to the reading of the Megillah in Hebrew and then to read the whole Megillah again in Laz. But it doesn't mean that it's absolutely not. That's to read the whole Megillah in one stretch, I guess, in another language, and perhaps people will rely on that. But to read and to interrupt during the Megillah in order to explain it, that's valid. Now, the point in the notes over there is that in the time of the Mishnah, and actually today it's even in Yemeni communities, they still do this. It would translate, as we're reading the Torah, all the Haftarah, it would be translated in Aramaic. In Torah, it's posuk. I think in Aramaic, in Haftarah, it's 3 psukim. At any rate, there is the idea of translating. Why is it that Megillah we don't have such a takana? The simple answer would be that it says in the Megillah, in the Gemara, koirin leloya zois belaz, that you could read the Megillah, the Chatchila. You can read it for people who don't understand Hebrew. You could read it in their language. And perhaps because there is that option of reading the Megillah in another language, therefore there's no need to make a translation, a simultaneous translation, so to speak, because if they're really not able to understand the Megillah in English, I'm sorry, in the original, there is room to read the whole thing in another language. Lemaisa, this is not done, as we all know. No one does the reading of the Megillah in English, etc. And one of the concerns for doing so is the following. If you would want to read the Megillah in English, does the Megillah have to be written on parchment? And that's going to be a massive, undertaking to get a sofer to write a Megillah in English on parchment, because it seems to be that this is one of the requirements. Actually, it was during COVID I had this conversation, possibly that there is room to say that it's that the requirements of the Megillah being written on dafka and parchment, etc., would not be applicable to other languages. And I was overruled. I admitted that it wasn't. I couldn't substantiate that, and therefore it remains that the Megillah, if it's going to be read in other languages, it would have to be written on parchment by hand. All of that is certainly impractical. Right. Mendel is pointing out, Lulav on the other days, the cotton is not being makni, is lending or shalmut. That's right. That's true. It's only the first 2 days possibly where there's a chiyuv of that it should be lochem. Okay, so actually question 7 we discussed in previous years, but let's go through this again. What is the minimum for matonas lev yoinim? I want to just throw in also that someone asked me, a shliach somewhere, can the matonas lev yoinim money be used for the Beis Chabad? And I told him no, that the needs of matonas lev yoinim, Beis Chabad is, of course, is very, very important. But if it doesn't qualify as ev yoinim, it should be for needy families. Unfortunately, they also exist, and so the money should go for needy families. Does it mean that they are totally destitute, or does it mean needy? So although it uses the word evyoinim, but the poskim say if they are needy, even if they're not absolutely destitute, is also eligible for matanas levyoinim. But now in the Mishnah Berurah in Tov Reish Tzadik Daled, so he quotes from the Ritvo that 2 prutas is enough for matanas levyoinim. But then the Piskei Teshuvos quotes that many poskim disagree with this, and they say it should be a matana chashuva, enough for the oni to be able to purchase a seudah which has enough food, the volume of 3 bayim. So it means they'll be able to buy a roll or something. It doesn't have to be a fancy fleshik seudah, but how much would it cost to buy a few slices of bread? So that would be the shear of matanas lev yoinim. So 50 pence, whatever it may be, but something that you'd be able to buy at least a poor man's meal. Right. Someone is asking a question here. If reading in a school mixed Yidden and Goyim, but you want to fulfill duty of Yidden and Jewish teachers, can you explain in between chapters in English? The answer is basically yes. You are allowed to. Let's go back to that. The answer is that reading between chapters or between is the only downside of that is going to take so much longer. But yes, if that's going to, it's okay to do that. To stop and then translate a little bit. That's okay. They've made videos or something with to be able to accompany the reading of the Megillah, which is another way of keeping people's attention. It's like it's kind of parallel what you're reading. Okay, so now someone asked me, a couple of people recently asked me the same question. Clarity, what's the story about writing base hay or base samach daled? So we're away from Purim and just regular stuff, regular shilas. And so here I saw in my notes that in the sichos which came out last year, 2 years ago, so at the back of the sichos, as I mentioned a few times, there's letters of the Rebbe which are never published before, and they're published in the back of the sikhs, which come out on a weekly basis. So this is Parshas Tazria Metzora Tovshin Pei Aleph, and so there's 2 letters published there. The one letter I'm reading here. So the Rebbe writes to the person who's asking some. I don't remember what he asked about. The Rebbe says that the most important thing in Kiyum HaTorah mitzvahs, the main thing is to do Kiyum HaTorah mitzvahs v'poel, and also to increase mizman l'zman. And even though every year has got a chazaka, that they're certainly doing mitzvahs and increasing mizman l'zman, but in addition to, there's a psak din that when you have a doubt, if you can verify, you have an obligation to verify. The main thing, says the Rebbe, I noticed that on your letters, it doesn't start with Baruch Hashem Komenig Yisrael. In other words, the Rebbe sees in the fact he didn't write Baruch Hashem as a diminishing in standards of Yiddishkeit. And the Minig Yisrael writing Baruch Hashem is based upon Tono Dvei Eliyahu. Of the Iker, that this is the widespread Minig. And then the Rebbe continues to complain to this person, why I haven't seen you in the list of the people doing Mivtzoim, etc., in your area. Meanwhile, the Rebbe does give the fellow a telling off. How come you didn't write Baruch Hashem, K'minig Bnei Yisrael? And that is based upon Tonot Ve'Eliyahu. So before we go further, Baruch Hashem, means blessed is Hashem. What does Beis Samach Dal stand for? It's B'siyata Dishmaya, with the help of Hashem. In Hebrew, you'd write Be'ezras Hashem. These are actually very different expressions. Baruch Hashem is an acknowledgement. Beis Samach Daled is asking, or perhaps also you're staying. What you're doing is with the help of Hashem. It doesn't have the word blessing there. So now this is a very, very important here in this question of Beis Hey or Beis Samach Daled. Now, what's this? Where is it written in Tonot Ve'Eliyahu? I must tell you, when this came out, I started browsing Tonot Ve'Eliyahu, going through the whole Sefer, tried to find it, and I didn't find it explicitly. But here it does say in the Tonot Ve'Eliyahu the following: that the Torah begins with the letter Beis, because Beis stands for Brocha. So it starts with the Beis because Beis stands for Brocha. From this is derived the Heiroe of Poischim Bebrocha, that you start off with Brocha. Then gives some further references, but this is what the Tonot Ve'Eliyahu is saying, that you start off with Brocha, and therefore this is the significance of the beginning of a letter. You're sharing some news or whatever it may be, but you start off with Poischim Bebrocha. So Baruch Hashem, I said a brocha. When you say Beis Samach Daled, you haven't started off with a brocha. Now, I'm not going to deny that there are Maimorim of the Rabbeim which start off with Beis Samach Daled. And so it makes sense, perhaps, you're launching into a project, and you say that it should be with Hatzlocha, so you write Beis Samach Daled. As I'm speaking now, I'm thinking of the Tenoim for Chasana, or a Ksuba, I remember now which starts off with Be'ez Hashem Yisborech. So you're launching into a project of a Chasana, or a married life, so you say it should be with the help of Hashem. So you're invoking Hashem's, that's fine. But this idea, when you're communicating with someone in a letter, to start off with a brocha, that's what the Beis Hay will do. Then there's a second letter. Sivas Beis Hay Oy Beis. Now this is more clearly addressing the difference between the two. The first one just said, why didn't you write Beis Hay? But here is addressing the difference between Beis Hay and Beis Samach Daled. Is it necessary? So first of all, he says Beis Hay or Beis Samach Daled. Is it necessary whatever you write, or only when it's an important thing? And is it better to write Beis Samach Daled? So first of all, the Rebbe writes the mocker, the source of writing Beis Hay is in the Tonot Ve'Eliyahu. That's the general Halacha. And all right, I think the Rebbe says it's a generic Halacha, and there may be a various minhagim. And then you ask about whether Beis Hay is better than Beis Samach Daled. So the Rebbe says, no, there's no advantage of Beis Samach Daled over Beis Hey. On Meister Rav, that they were Gedol Yisrael, the Gedol Yisrael would write Beis Hey. What's better? Why is Baruch Beis B'siyata Deshmaya? Why should that be better? Ma adifus yeshne lahabita shmayo the Gabi Hashem. Why should be with the help of heaven better than with the help of Hashem, of the name, translated literally? And then the Rebbe has another thing, and that is that there are those who are concerned that Baruch Hashem is Hey is the letter of Hashem's name, and then if the letter then ends up in the rubbish, so then it's a disgrace to Hashem's name. Actually, that's and there's a letter of the Ragat Shava to that effect. That Beis Hey he's worried that it may go to waste, disgrace. So the Rebbe says, actually, think of the word Shomayim. The Rebbe is concerned that's actually got more Kedushas Hashem than the word Hashem. Hashem is simply the name. That is quite innocuous. When you say Shomayim, so you say Avinu Shabashamayim, etc. So when, let's say, in the context of Nedarim, if a person would say, this is Kodesh LaShamayim, I believe it will have Kedusha, because Shamayim is understood as it's referring to Hashem. Whereas Hashem means the name, but it's less pointed, and therefore less of a worry of being put in Shemus, etc. Sorry, of not being put to shame. My understanding is that actually about Beis Hey, as far as our minhag, it does not have a kedusha. It's okay to put it in the bin. I believe that's what the Olam are doing. They take, if you write letters and afterwards they end in the bin, and we're not so worried about it. Although, I think we've gone through this once before, there was a story that a shliach made a flyer. What's the difference? The flyer was something, is Purim like Halloween? Or what's the difference between Purim and Halloween? And the Rebbe was very upset with the question, the way it was put on the flyer, the notice. And the Rebbe he expressed he's not happy with it at all, and he told him that he'd take all those notices comparing or not comparing Purim and Halloween, and take them all and destroy them, but cut off the Beis Hey before doing all of that. So he had to take all his 1,000 posters and cut off the corners where the Beis Hey. But does that mean that Rebbe holds that Beis Hey has or perhaps he saw it as a tikkun, that this fellow had overstepped kind of the between kedusha and the opposite, so to go to the extreme as a tikkun possibly. But right, someone is pointing out that the base of Bereshis does not mean bracha, just that the base is a symbol to bracha. So then Beis Samach Daled starts with a base. Okay, fine. Right, no, all right. We can say that, but we have the Tana Dver Eliyahu which says Poskim B'bracha. We have an instruction. The fact that you have a base now, which is a remez for a base starts for like the base of Bereshis. The Tana Dver Eliyahu is saying that the Torah begins with the choice of the word Bereshis rather than another word, which could have started with an aleph, etc., in order to say the Poskim B'bracha. So we have a duty to be Posech B'bracha. And with Beis Samach Daled, it has a base, but that's a remes. It's not Posech B'bracha. Okay. Someone's asking, which is used for a. I didn't fully get that one. Okay. Let's move on. So last week we had this. I shared with you a question. Someone had asked why in the mention of in Hoidu, why do we don't spit there? So and I mentioned that the Rebbe answered someone, and when Rebbe Baumgarten was there, he said that in the middle of a pasuk, one shouldn't be mafsik to spit. But in passing, I mentioned about during Aleinu, which is said during Shmoneh Esrei, Rosh Hashanah, and Chazar Shas of Yom Kippur. What do you do there about do you spit there when you've said Shehem Mishtachim Heva V'Lorik? So I mentioned about putting it into a tissue, and actually someone raised the question whether that is correct. And he asked me, Rabbi Gordon actually, he asked me, have you seen anyone doing that? So I said, no, I haven't seen. That's true. When I remembered, I had been preparing a tissue when I'm down at the Omid, but I haven't seen anyone making a point of it. And so let's look at the halacha about that. Before reading this halacha about spitting during davening, just Rabbi Namdar, I see, is asking about, is the conclusion that Baruch Hashem is preferable always? Certainly in letters, yeah, that's what we're seeing from the Rebbe. That when we write a letter, we start with Beis Hey, and you see that's certainly meaning Chabad, that we start off with the Beis Hey, and now you know the reason for that is because we're medayek to the inyan of Poschim B'Bracha. Okay, so now we have here our halacha in Shulchan Aruch, Siman Tzadik Zayin. One who spits during davening is as if he's spitting in the presence of a king. Therefore, it is also to spit willingly, unless you are in a state of oinus, unless you're forced to see or have something that's really bothering you. Because even if you're after the davening, an end of Shmones, I guess. So long as you haven't stepped back, you're still in the mode of standing in before the king. If you do need to spit, that you shouldn't bother you, mutter, so that you shouldn't bother you, that you should be able to continue davening. So if you've got, for some reason, you need to, and then he says, if you do need to spit during davening, so then don't spit on the ground, but then absorb it in a cloth, in a tissue. So reading this now carefully, he's saying that actually it's not appropriate if it was forced upon you, then you should absorb it in a cloth, in a tissue. But l'chatchila, you shouldn't be spitting during davening. So I guess I stand corrected that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you're middle of davening. So then there's a l'chatchila. So don't spit. What should you do? All right, I guess perhaps if you want, you're sensitive, you can just swallow that bit of saliva and then go on with your Anachnu Kodim. What do we have here? Oh, next. So last week we had this story about a tracker sewn into a coat, and I'd said it's okay because it's tough, that it's there, it's become part of the garment. Someone did object to like that during the week. Okay, fine. But now someone following on from that, so there are people who are, I say criminal, I don't mean whether they are not, it's not for me to judge, but for some reason they are they're let out on bail or something, but they have to wear a tracker on them. And so would they be allowed to go out out of the house on Shabbos? Could be a person who's autistic, and so it's important for their carers to keep track where they are. They shouldn't get lost. Alzheimer's sufferer. This is a kind of tracker which would be on the person the whole time, I believe. Then there's another type of similar question. A person who has special medical needs. So they've got a bracelet of sorts, which they would wear on them in case they are not conscious and can't tell their specific needs. So they have this bracelet which has their medical details. So would they be allowed to wear those when walking the street on Shabbos? So let's deal with one thing at a time. So here we have for Shulchan Aruch, Siman Shin Aleph, and it talks about a person who is a prisoner, and he has a shackle, he has a chains on his feet. So he is allowed to walk outside on Shabbos. Because they are with him the whole time, it's like a garment, and you don't have to worry that they'll fall off, because they're probably put on very firm, that they shouldn't run away. So I suspect that the tracker for a criminal, I've never seen these trackers, but I would imagine they are similar, that they're worn the whole time. That makes it easier, because it's something which is all for the other criminal statistic, etc., worn the whole time. Therefore, that makes it like a malbush. The problem, which is more of a concern, is when, let's say, a person is in hospital either as a patient or as a visitor, and they would have a identity tag, and that's worn around the wrist, and that is not for long term. Would you be allowed to walk out in the street wearing such a tag? So this is from the Sefer Orchos Shabbos, and he says that this identity tag, identity bracelet, is not a garment, and it's not a garment, it's not an ornament, and he actually struggles. He struggles with giving us a heter. He says, when you see about this slave who's wearing a necklace to identify him, that's because he's wearing it the whole time. But but here this bracelet is only for the short term. Therefore, arguably, it doesn't become a chelik of his body. So that does remain a problem. As I said, I've had this question about a person staying with a patient. So a patient himself is not going to leave this hospital on Shabbos in any case. But if you have a relative who's there and they need to go out across the street, whatever, and they need about wearing this bracelet. So that does seem to be a problem, because that bracelet is just a piece of information they're carrying with them, and it's not a straightforward heter to be permitted to carry it. I didn't spend too much on the medical details, and that would possibly also depend. If it's the kind of thing they're wearing the whole time, then we've got this heter that it becomes a malbush. If it's something which they're wearing the whole time, and it's unlikely it'll fall off if it's made well. But if it's something which they are likely to take off, well then, all right. But if it's something which they're wearing the whole time, it's unlikely to fall off. So then I think we can rely on this heter, similar to the prisoner's tag, which is permitted. That's just one extra point, which is not on your list of questions, but I wanted to share with you. And that is, this coming week is Parshas Kisiso. And I'm sure you all remember that Rishon and Sheni are very long, and then the last 5 aliyahs are shorter. And the reason for that allocation is because the story of the golden calf, of the Egel Hazov, is in those parshas. And generally, when we give an aliyah to a person, we want it to be inspiring, and we don't want it to be an accusation to the person. If the person has got a fault which is addressed in that parsha, where we wouldn't deliberately give them an aliyah in that parsha. So the Egel Hazov is an indictment on all the Yidden who participated in the Egel, with the exception of the Leviim. And so there is a point of having the Parshas Egel being read, giving the aliyah to a Levi, so it's not an indictment on the one who's having the aliyah. The question is, what would happen if there's no kohen and you'd give a Levi the first parsha, but then the second parsha would be given to Yisrael? So then, actually, this is what we're seeing over here. That if there is no kohen, this is from the sefer called Luach Dover Be'itoy, I believe, from Mordechai Genot, but I've seen this in other sources. If there is no kohen, you should give a Levi from the beginning of the Sedra until Shlishi. Yeah, so you give him a very long aliyah, and in this way, the Parshas Egel is read by a Levi rather than by a Yisrael. And then I just saw this today as interesting observation. If there's no kohen nor Levi, but there is a ger tzedek, so the gerim they have no history of being involved personally in the Egel Hazav, and therefore, in quotes from Yitzchak Zilberstein, that's another option of giving a ger tzedek, which I'm actually, as I'm reading this, I'm not so convinced, because there is something about being super sensitive to a ger, not to remind them of their lineage. And by saying, "Oh, we can give you because you're a ger," that might have also a negative message. So I'm not sure whether that's a good idea. But meanwhile, just give you if you don't have a kohen in your shul, so then and you do have a Levi, so that's the one way of doing it, to give him an extra. If there are no Kohanim and no Leviim, so then we just read the Torah. The Torah is, after all, given to us, to everyone. All right, here's a Purim question. If Haman was an Eved Knaini, if he had been set free, would he have been mechuyev to hear the Megillah? As we know that Mordechai had in his shoe, he had a document that Haman was his slave, and that he would show it to Haman. But if Mordechai would have set him free, so would he have to hear the Megillah? I guess yes. I just mentioned today, my father-in-law Shalom would say how Avigdor, who was the one who Masad, who was the informer to the Russian government to cause the Alter Rebbe to be arrested, in his elder age he became an alcoholic, and he would come to the Yutes Kislev Fabrengens, and he would say, "I'm the one who made you this Yom Tov, so give me all the alcohol." So I wish you a good Woch and a Freilichen Purim and a Tov Lev Mishter Tamid. Kol Tov.